Okay, thank you for that, Bilgin. Tommy, I will come back to that point, Tommy, but I just want to put one quite fulsome point here, if I may. I'm sitting here in a studio in Doha. We are in Qatar. We are arguably in the heart of the Middle East. Therefore, we are in the heart of Islam. Let me just read something to you from the Holy Book, and I want you to react to that, okay? And you can't see me, but I've got a copy of the Quran in front of me. There are parts of our Holy Book that talk about people being persecuted and killed. There are parts of a holy book that talk about people all over the world being killed because you are my followers. Another quote from one of the holy books in this part of the world talks about people being stoned to death with stones until they die. Another part of a holy book that one can read in this part of the world talks about utterly destroying your enemies, spare them not, but slay both man and woman. When you hear those quotes, what do you think that speaks to?
I'd ask you why you're reading the Old Testament to me.
You've had that before, haven't you?
Simple question.
So,
no, it's a simple question. I'm not stupid. You're sitting quoting verses from the Old Testament, thinking that I'm a moron that would think that's from the Quran. I know the Old Testament and I know the Quran. Yeah, can I ask you a question? Have you read the Quran?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
So you
in English, not in Arabic, but in English.
In English. Are you free, sitting where you are in Doha, to criticise the Prophet Muhammad? Are you free to do that?
Yes, I am. I have had intelligent conversations with my Islamic colleagues on the very...
Yeah. So you know of the life of Muhammad, yes? You know that he murdered 600 people. You know that he raped. You know that he has... No. People in the Bible is very different to people in the Bible and the messenger of God, who is the most moral compass for every Muslim in the world. And when he is the moral compass for every Muslim in the world, and he married a 6-year-old child called Aisha, and he raped her when she was 9, I have a problem with that. And when people wish to live as Muhammad did in my country, well, no. The country you're sitting in now, people from Israel are not even allowed to enter it. So if we want to talk about fascism, the country you're in now, people with Israeli passports. Okay, is that untrue?
Same subject.
Can someone in Qatar leave Islam?
Yes.
Is apostasy punishable?
You don't have to be Islamic to be in Qatar. You can leave the country. You can come into the country if you are Jewish. A Muslim cannot leave Islam is punishable in Qatar. The country that you're talking to me from, the country whose tower I'm sitting in, the country that funds radicalisation worldwide, the country that supports Hamas, and you're sitting there trying to take some moral high ground about issues in the world that relate to Islamic extremism. When the country and the people who are paying your wage are propagating that extremism worldwide. I've come into this building and just had to go through an airport-style scanner, and when I asked why, they said because of the Paris attacks. Tommy, I do have to move the debate on because I do have to move the debate on. Yes, of course I do, because otherwise you and I will end up having...
what you're hearing.
No, that's not true, sir. Otherwise you and I will have to have... You and I will have to have a conversation down the pub the next time I'm back in London. Alexander, coming back to you.
And a warm welcome to the programme. Today with me, Peter Dobby. Amsterdam, Birmingham, Calais, Prague, all of those European cities and more saw rallies as supporters of the anti-immigrant and anti-Islam group PEGIDA protested at what they call the Islamization of Europe. The group had all but fizzled out last year, but has gained momentum after the influx of refugees into Europe over the past few months. And although some protesters say they were disappointed by a low turnout, there were still thousands of people who took part. The biggest of the demonstrations was in the German city of Dresden, where nearly 10,000 people took to the streets to call for a change in government policy. We'll get to our discussion in a moment. But first, for Inside Story, this report from our correspondent, Dominic Kane.
This was their opportunity to show strength in numbers, to link up with supporters from across Europe. Dresden is where the anti-Islamic movement PEGIDA sprang from. Its followers are fearful of the future.
We will be a minority. In the end, I'm here for my grandchildren. It cannot be that I am a minority in my own country. This is the way it will end up being.
The people at this demonstration have come here to show their extreme unhappiness with the refugee policies of the coalition government. They say they represent a growing sentiment in German society, and they say they want those policies radically changed now.
PEGIDA's organisers had called for a series of rallies in 5 other European countries. This was the French northern port city, Calais, which has long been a destination for refugees and migrants trying to reach the UK. Around 150 PEGIDA supporters were involved in disturbances with the police. 10 people were arrested. Across the Channel, hundreds of people marched through the English city of Birmingham, but the numbers were lower than in Dresden. Over the course of 2015, PEGIDA had struggled to retain its support, with dwindling attendances at weekly rallies. But one leading local academic told me all that changed late last year.
They have been reinvigorated by the ongoing and increasing and enormous immigration into Germany, which started last September, because all the fears PEGIDians cultivated came true. All the statements of politicians that PEGIDians would talk about fancy problems, which were no really problems, turned out to be wrong.
But that analysis was not shared by several thousand opponents of PEGIDA, who also rallied in Dresden on Saturday. Germany's coalition government is broadly committed to its refugee policy, despite the hardening in public opinion. But that policy will soon face a serious examination when 3 key states hold parliamentary elections next month. Dominic Kane, Al-Jazeera, Dresden.
Now, as we've been saying, the group organising these rallies and spreading the ideology behind them, well, it's called PEGIDA. That's a German acronym, as the group was founded in Dresden, as it stands for the Patriotic Europeans Against the Islamisation of the West. PEGIDA first emerged about 2 years ago. Its supporters promote restrictive immigration policies, and they've described Islam as, quotes, Nazism incarnate, quotes. For more on this, let's bring in our guests today. Joining us on Skype from Basel is Bilgin Ayata, Professor of Political Sociology at the University of Basel. Bilgin specialises on social movements and conflict. In London, Tommy Robinson, Coordinator of PEGIDA UK. Tommy's also the author of the book Enemy of the State. Also joining us from The Hague, Alexander Spoor, filmmaker and creator of the social media video, The Holy Quran Experiment. Welcome to you all. Tommy, what's wrong with Islam today?
What's wrong with Islam today? You could look to any country in the world and pick any number of the things that Muslims are doing in the name of Islam. There's an entire state being created in the Middle East, which is propagating murder, rape, enslavement of non-Muslims. That's it, anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. There's a hell of a lot wrong with Islam today. Well, it's not just today, there's a hell of a lot wrong with Islam for the last 1400 years.
Are you anti-Islam and or anti-migrant?
I'm not anti-immigration, no. I'm also not anti-Muslim. I have a problem with the ideology of Islam because it propagates and incites hatred against me. It has a view of me as a non-Muslim, as a kafar, and I will speak out against it.
Coming to you, Bilgin, that kind of rhetoric, does that make the situation in Europe better or worse? Because it occurs to me that what Tommy is doing is making the situation in Europe a lot more combustible than it has to be.
Well, absolutely. I think the interesting aspect of this Islamization discourse that right-wing populist movements right now are carrying forward in Europe is actually making the secular societies in Europe much more focused on religion than actually they should be as secular societies, right? So this kind of generalization that we just heard is a rhetoric that is now becoming rather possible to say in political discourse. But I think really we should not forget that after all, Europe and European countries are have secular orders where these kind of generalizations on religion just have no place, should not have place.
Alexander in The Hague, when you're out and about making your videos on YouTube, do you get a sense that makes you understand why organisations such as PEGIDA get traction with particularly, say, the younger generation in Europe who live in deprived, less well-off areas?
I guess there's a certain understanding there where I speak to a lot of different people that have a lot of different opinions, and yeah, a lot of people are fearful for what the Islamization, if you will, of the West will do for their safety. I also believe that, on the other hand, there are a lot of people that are also scared but more willing to inform themselves. And informing yourself sometimes also results in being fearful. But some people, they look at it from another angle. Also from my age range and my generation, where there's really no point in being divided on how we should treat each other. I think that if we listen, or at least I feel like a lot of people feel like if we listen to each other, if we have a civilized discussion about how we feel as opposed to what is right and wrong, a lot of people are willing to have that discussion. So I'm optimistic.
Tommy, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I'm not optimistic. I'd like to ask that lady what I've said that's factually incorrect, or if she's in support of punishment for apostasy, if she's in support of death for homosexuals, if she's in support of punishment for adultery. What is it that I oppose that she stands up for? I'd like to know what it is she stands up for, because or what I've said that's factually incorrect. Because she may not like hearing the truth, but the truth is still the truth.
Who's trying to introduce the death penalty for homosexuals in Germany or in the UK? Who's doing that?
Pardon, what did you say?
Who's advocating right now? Is there a movement that you see in the UK or in Germany that is trying to implement sharia law, let's say, is trying to advocate for death penalty against homosexuals? Is there something like that happening? What is Islamization?
Yes. Yes, there is Islamisation. In the UK, we have 85 operating Sharia law courts. 85. So yes, there is. There are many Muslims calling for Sharia across Europe.
Tommy, just to interrupt you for a second, correct me if I'm wrong here. I've spent the past 3 months in Doha. Before that, I lived and worked in London for a quarter of a century, and up and down the UK. I have never, ever, ever seen Sharia law being applied by a legally constituted British court. That has never, ever happened.
Does it matter if it's a legally constituted British court? We have 85 Sharia court tribunals which are operating within our country, which are making decisions such as when a child gets to the age of 7, he's taken away from the custody of the mother and given to the father. The women are inheriting 50% less than the men. We have Sharia tribunals in our country. And when you're talking about what's going on across Europe, on New Year's Eve we had over 800 women who were sexually abused and assaulted in just one city. We've had people murdered and butchered by refugees in Paris. This lady says that the PEGIDA and groups like that are a danger to democracy. What democracy? No one's voted or asked if we want barbarians to come through our borders. No one's asked us. No one's asked the people of Europe. If you ask the people of Europe, they'll tell you quite frankly, we don't want people coming into our country who wish to bring their backward way of life or their culture or their intolerance with them. And that's the reality of where we're at in Europe.
I'm sorry, I'd like to step in there. You're sort of generalizing the people of Europe as if every individual in Europe is against the income of Islamic immigrants. I mean, of course, I
didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said if you put it to a vote. I said if you put it to a vote, people would vote against bringing in 1.5 million Muslim young fighting-age men into the country of Germany. If you put it to a vote now in the UK, the majority of people are opposed to open border policy. The majority.
Tommy, just allow Alexander to finish his point. Carry on, Alexander.
Well, no, I'm interested in that because I don't have that statistic. So I'm not sure whether or not that is true. You might be right. On the other hand, I know that across Europe, I don't think this will be the sentiment everywhere. And as much as I understand that there's this fear that these so-called, or in your words, barbarians are entering Europe, that's sort of a generalization of all Muslims. Because even if you're talking about a few individuals, that are trespassing our laws, that are violating our European laws, then we have courts in place to make sure that those people see a proper trial and
guys,
go to court.
I just want to move the debate on to broaden it out a little bit. Bilgin, bring us some sense and logic on this. Do you, through your research and your writing, understand the debate in cities like Calais, cities like Birmingham, cities like Dresden, where people maybe do feel a little bit like there's a Trojan horse coming through the door, but they, of course, they're not anti-Islamic, they're not racist, they're not anti-Muslim, but they do have an issue with seeing their country changing in their perception, in their minds, very, very quickly?
Let me speak for Germany. The city that you mentioned, Dresden, where the PEGIDA demonstrations are taking place and where the movement emerged, the number of the Muslim population is less than 1%, right? So obviously there are sentiments within the population there that is very much picking up, not on the day-to-day experiences. They cannot have them with, less than 1% of the population, but they are responding to political discourse and to media, of course. We have to see that, especially after September 11, but also already before that, the discussion on immigrants changed in Europe, where religion became the key marker, where immigrants were mostly becoming presented as Muslims instead of immigrants. And if you look at how over time the political discussion, way before the right-wing populist movements had this kind of increasing strength that it has now, the media and politics were already targeting, often criminalizing, and putting immigrants into a negative light. So why does someone in Dresden who has very little encounter, right, with immigrants or with people with a Muslim background, goes to a demonstration like that? Well, I think these are results of years of political discussions that have taken immigrants as scapegoats for all sorts of politics going wrong. Okay. And we had this already in the 1990s in Germany.
Okay,
once,
Tommy. Okay, thank you for that, Bilgin. Tommy, I will come back to that point, Tommy, but I just want to put one quite fulsome point to you, if I may. I'm sitting here in a studio in Doha. We are in Qatar. We are arguably in the heart of the Middle East. Therefore, we are in the heart of Islam. Let me just read something to you from the Holy Book, and I want you to react to that, okay? And you can't see me, but I've got a copy of the Quran in front of me. There are parts of a Holy Book that talk about people being persecuted and killed. There are parts of a Holy Book that talk about people all over the world being killed because you are my followers. Another quote from one of the Holy Books in this part of the world talks about people being stoned to death with stones until they die. Another part of a holy book that one can read in this part of the world talks about utterly destroying your enemies, spare them not, but slay both man and woman. When you hear those quotes, what do you think that speaks to?
I'd ask you why you're reading the Old Testament to me.
You've had that before, haven't you?
Simple question.
So,
no, it's a simple question. I'm not stupid. You're sitting quoting verses from the Old Testament, thinking that I'm a moron that would think that's from the Quran. I know the Old Testament and I know the Quran. Can I ask you a question? Have you read the Quran?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Yeah? So
in English, not in Arabic, but in English.
In English. Are you free, sitting where you are in Doha, to criticise the Prophet Muhammad? Are you free to do that?
Yes, I am. I have had intelligent conversations with my Islamic colleagues on the very same subject.
Can someone in Qatar leave Islam?
Yes.
Is apostasy punishable?
You don't have to be Islamic to be in Qatar. You can leave the country, you can come into the country if you are Jewish.
A Muslim cannot leave Islam. Is punishable in Qatar. The country that you're talking to me from, the country whose tower I'm sitting in, the country that funds radicalisation worldwide, the country that supports Hamas, and you're sitting there trying to take some moral high ground about issues in the world that relate to Islamic extremism, when the country and the people who are paying your wage are propagating that extremism worldwide. I've come into this building and just had to go through an airport-style scanner, and when I asked why, they said because of the Paris attacks.
Tommy, I do have to move the debate on because I do have to move the debate on. Yes, of course I do. Because otherwise you and I will end up having...
what you're hearing.
No, that's not true, sir. Otherwise you and I will have to have... You and I will have to have a conversation down the pub the next time I'm back in London. Alexander, coming back to you, the imagery here surely is very strong, because when you see tear gas being used, when you see Molotov cocktails being used, what does that leave as a lingering aftertaste?
Look, we're talking about we're talking about something that is currently an emotional issue, something that we'll be having a different discussion about in a week from now, something that we'll get context to in the coming days. So, you know, of course, emotionally that's frightening. Emotionally, that's confrontational. Do I have a certain aftertaste yet? No, not even. But I do want to jump into something that Tommy said, because I find that more important. Whereas I feel like the discussion that we're having isn't so much about what to do about. Or let me put it differently. The discussion that we're having is mostly about the identity of Islam as opposed to getting rid of it or not, because there's really, or you know, or banning it from non-Islamic countries. As you said, you know, you can have intelligent conversations about these issues with scholars, and as Tommy put, yeah, but you can also get, you know, you can also get prosecuted or attacked if you leave the religion. I think that we're very much talking about the interpretations and actions of individuals.
Bilgin, Tommy is talking about statistics. Statistically, in the run-up to elections, we had it in the UK last year, those right-of-centre parties, in Germany it's the AfD, in the UK it's UKIP, they do very well in opinion polls, but when push comes to shove, when the electorate of Europe has to vote, Europe is still essentially, the DNA is still liberal. Is there a chance, however, that that might change?
You know, I don't like to talk of DNA when talking about societies, but I do think that these kind of right-wing populist movements, there were several times where there is an increase and then it comes down again. Before, I think because you said statistics, what is really important also to look at, because I feel this discussion is really not picking up the core point. The core point is not what is Islam and what is it not. The core point is what is happening in the course of this right-wing anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim mobilization in Europe. So in Germany alone, in 2015, there were 5 times more attacks on refugee homes, on camps, than the year before. And, you know, 2015 was, of course, marked by the PEGIDA demonstrations. So this kind of political rhetoric that we've been listening to is not just something that remains in the abstract. We have heard in several rallies now increasingly very open calls inciting violence. Even the one of the key figures of the AfD had recently suggested that the border police should shoot at unarmed immigrants. So I think what we really have to talk about is what kind of an assault and danger this kind of right-wing populist movements are posing for democracy in Europe. This is a key question at the heart. We have to talk about this kind of racist, very, you know, what Alexander was just very politely saying is that making the difference between individual actions and then drawing general conclusions upon a whole population, well, that's the core definition of racism. Right?
Alexander.
So we really see that what we have to talk about what kind of violence is being incited in Europe by these right-wing mobilizations against immigrants.
Alexander, coming to you in The Hague, I'm not sure how old you are. You look to me as if you've got a lifetime of voting for politicians ahead of you, at least. Do you feel that the right wing in the Netherlands will carry on gaining traction, particularly if Europe, if the demographic of Europe changes as much as I suspect Tommy is worried it is about to change?
If it changes as much as Tommy is worried it's about to change, then yes. That's a pretty easy question and answer right there. Do I think it will change as much as Tommy thinks it will? I'm not sure. I think that I'm from The Hague myself, and here in the Netherlands, you know, we've already got a bunch of foreigners, if you will, people, or at least second-generation immigrants, third-generation immigrants. And immigration has been quite an issue here, and with this whole current immigration issue, Syria, a lot of Muslim refugees, you know, the anti-Islamic sentiment is increasing. The right-wing parties are gaining more following. But I do also notice that that is almost always a result of fear. And this fear is almost always a result of the way that the media reports incidents and or the way that this discussion is being held, which is very much shock value, very much, you know, headlines.
Tommy, that's an interesting point, isn't it, about shock value? Because with all due respect to you, and it was arguably brave of you to come on to Al Jazeera to talk about this, I know, because you obviously brought some preconceived ideas to this debate about Al Jazeera and about Doha, Qatar, blah, blah, blah. But your organisation is more than pub regulars playing darts and less than a political party. OK, just let me finish. It is less than a political party. Next spring, when there's another wave of tens of thousands of refugees who, if they stay on the other, when they stay on the other side of the border, they will die because they are, as we speak, being starved to death. Do you mount more of the demonstrations that we've seen across Europe? Do you carry on with this?
PEGIDA's demonstrations yesterday are peaceful. The only violence come from the far left who are attacking them. Can I ask how many refugees Doha, how many refugees Saudi Arabia have taken in? And a message, seeing as I am on Al Jazeera, and I know Arabs are watching this across the world, a message is that we don't want your money. We don't want your money in London. We don't want you funding madrasas. We don't want your blood or your petrol money in our country. The people of Europe are waking up. They're growing in confidence. They're organising, and they will resist every attempt, your efforts to Islamify and take over our continent. Because we know that your countries are behind this, the people at the top of your countries are behind this. If you so care about your worldwide ummah, let the Muslims in. Give them refuge in your country. That's culturally the same as you, ideologically the same as you. You give them refuge. Don't leave the burden upon the people of Europe, because what they're doing now in our country is raping their way through it.
OK, we will, on that very strong and I suspect completely inaccurate point, we will have to leave the debate there. Thank you to all our guests.
So did you?
I'll just get my jacket, and then they're getting.
Organised return transport.
Yeah, they said. I don't know if after those outbursts they're going to pay for my return transfer. But yeah, they said they were sorting me a lift home.
Yeah. So if you turn the data back on your phone, you should get a text from Madison Lee.
Yep.
It should be here waiting.
Okay, cool.
If not, if you haven't got a text, we'll check with reception.
Yeah, I'll just get my jacket. Yeah. How do you think that went? I wonder if I've got a fatwa after that. To be honest, because I know I'm on that news studio, I know the people who are watching it, I thought it was about time that I told them we don't want their money. And we don't. And our politicians may want it, but we don't.